Imagine a country, right, that is just so extraordinarily wealthy that its citizens basically, well, they essentially won the global geographic lottery.
Oh, absolutely. Like a total jackpot.
Right. A place where the sheer abundance of just this one single natural resource catapulted the local population into like the very upper echelons of global wealth.
We're talking top tier.
Yeah, boasting a per capita GDP that rivaled or even, surpassed the most advanced industrialized nations on Earth.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. And you'd naturally assume, right, that this kind of immense concentrated wealth would buy the ultimate luxury.
You mean like health, longevity, a pristine standard of living?
Exactly. But what if I told you that today, in that exact same country, the male life expectancy has plummeted to just 57 years old?
Wow, just 57.
Yeah. And what if I told you that 1 in 5 adults there is suffering from diabetes? And that the physical landscape has been so completely ravaged that there is literally 0% natural forest cover left.
It honestly sounds like, I don't know, a dystopian fiction, or maybe the aftermath of some catastrophic war.
Right, but it's not.
No, it's neither. It is the very real, very documented trajectory of a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
We are talking about the Republic of Nauru. It's a tiny island in the Central Pacific. And the contrast between, what they had and what they're currently enduring is one of the most brutal macroeconomic paradoxes in modern history.
It really is. So welcome to the table. Pull up a chair because this deep dive is custom tailored entirely for you.
Glad you're here with us.
Our mission today basically is to unpack the macroeconomic and social health data of Nauru. We're tracing its dramatic, almost violent evolution from this era of unimaginable resource wealth into, well, what the data undeniably points to as a modern multidimensional crisis.
A total crisis across the board.
Yeah, and I want to set the stage for you because the research report we are working from to guide this conversation, it's striking.
It really stands out.
It's pure white. It's this minimalist academic layout completely stripped of like flashy 3D graphics or colorful pie charts.
No fluff at all.
Right, nothing designed to soften the blow. It relies strictly on hard, raw CSV source data. It's just stark text numbers that tell an undeniable story.
And honestly, the visual austerity of the data is completely appropriate here.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. When a situation is this grave, embellishing the numbers or, wrapping them in colorful graphics actually detracts from the gravity of the reality.
That makes sense.
The raw numbers are shocking enough on their own, and as we navigate through this data, there is one overarching question I want you, the listener, to keep at the forefront of your mind.
Okay, what is it?
How did the rapid expansion and subsequent drain of immense wealth leave behind a resource curse that fundamentally fractured a nation's demographics, its domestic economy, and literally the biological health of its citizens?
Man, that is the million-dollar question, or I guess the billion-dollar question in this case.
Exactly.
Well, I think we need to start with the physical reality of the place, right?
Yeah.
Because the geography dictates the entire scope of the tragedy here.
It sets the boundaries for everything.
Yeah, so we are looking at a micro-island state. The raw data tells us the total land area of Nauru is roughly 21 square kilometers.
Which is tiny.
Unfathomably small for an independent republic. To put that into perspective for you, 21 square kilometers is, it's smaller than many large international airports.
That's a crazy visual.
Right. It is about a third the size of Manhattan.
And within that incredibly constrained 21 square kilometers, the population has slowly grown over the years to about 11,947 people.
Wait, almost 12,000 people in an area smaller than an airport?
Yep.
When you run the math on those two figures, you get a population density that is just staggering. We are looking at approximately 597 people per square kilometer.
It's so packed.
You are taking an entire nation's infrastructure, its government buildings, its schools, its hospitals, residential areas, waste management, and compressing it into a footprint that most cities would use just for like a single suburban neighborhood.
Which brings us to a data point that is frankly chilling when you consider that population density.
Oh, the environmental data.
Yeah, the ecological data tracking forest cover.
Mm-hmm.
And the number recorded for Nauru is 0%.
Absolutely none.
0. But we need to look at the methodology behind that specific metric to understand what it truly signifies, right?
Right, because people might think, oh, there's not a single tree on the island.
Exactly. In global data sets, forest area has a very strict specific definition.
Okay.
To qualify, a piece of land requires natural or planted stands of trees that are at least 5 meters high in situ.
So 5 meters tall, actually rooted there.
Yes, and it entirely excludes tree stands in agricultural production systems. So things like, fruit plantations or agroforestry systems, they don't count.
Oh, I see.
And it also excludes trees in urban parks and gardens.
So it's not saying there isn't a single tree anywhere. It's saying there is absolutely no natural functioning forest ecosystem left. There's no wild canopy at all.
Precisely. A complete lack of natural forest cover indicates severe systemic ecological fragility.
It's totally barren in a natural sense.
It points to profound land degradation. You have nearly 12,000 people living shoulder to shoulder on an island that has been so thoroughly altered that it has zero natural buffer.
And forests do so much heavy lifting ecologically speaking.
They do. They are the lungs and the water filters of an ecosystem. They retain soil, they regulate local temperatures, provide habitat for biodiversity, and crucially for an island, they protect inland areas from coastal winds.
Wow.
When you strip that away entirely, you aren't just altering the landscape, you are completely removing the island's natural immune system.
So for you listening, just imagine fitting an entire country's economy, society, and ecosystem into a space smaller than an airport, and then systematically stripping away absolutely all the wild trees.
It's a recipe for disaster.
You are living in a closed system pushed to its absolute physical limits. Every single drop of water, every inch of topsoil, every breeze off the ocean becomes a critical factor because there is no ecological cushion left to absorb any environmental shocks.
And to understand how an environment becomes this thoroughly degraded, we really have to look at the economic engine that drove this nation for decades.
Right, because this wasn't an accident.
No, the destruction of the landscape wasn't some natural disaster. It was a highly lucrative, deliberate industrial strategy.
It was mining.
Exactly. Nauru is entirely composed of high-grade phosphate rock.
Which is basically bird poop, right?
Yeah, it was essentially built from millennia of bird droppings accumulating over a coral reef over thousands and thousands of years.
That is wild.
And that phosphate is an incredibly valuable agricultural fertilizer. So they mined it. They literally scooped up the ground beneath their feet and exported it to the world.
And that leads us directly into the economic data from the report, which it outlines a trajectory that is less of a curve and more of an outright cliff.
A total free fall.
If you look at the historical wealth, using constant 2015 US dollars just for accuracy across the timeline, Nauru's GDP per capita peaked at an astounding $43,773.
That figure put them among the wealthiest nations on Earth on a per capita basis.
It's insane.
It was an absolute geyser of liquid capital flowing into a population of just a few thousand people at the time.
But then you look at the recent data, and it shows a catastrophic collapse. That per capita GDP plunged from nearly $44,000 down to roughly $8,570.
A massive wipeout.
Yeah. And concurrently, the total value of their exports plummeted from a peak of $65 million down to about $25.5 million.
This is a textbook, almost violently clear example of a severe economic recession triggered by absolute resource depletion.
The well ran dry.
Exactly. The phosphate export dividend, the massive influx of cash they received from selling off the physical structure of their island, it simply came to an end. The mine dried up.
But hold on, I want to challenge the mechanics of this collapse for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If you are a government, or even just like a mining executive, you can literally see the bottom of the mine approaching, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
You know the phosphate is a finite rock. You know exactly how many tons are left in the ground. So why does the data show such a sudden catastrophic cliff instead of a gradual managed descent?
That's the logical question.
Surely a nation with $43,000 per capita GDP didn't just keep aggressively spending until the absolute last rock was shipped out.
You would hope not.
Wouldn't they have invested that wealth into international markets or sovereign wealth funds so that the interest from those investments would pad the fall?
That is the logical assumption, absolutely. And it touches on the fundamental difference between two critical economic metrics that we see in the data, GDP and GNI.
Right. Gross domestic product and gross national income.
Exactly. GDP measures the value of all the goods and services produced within the country's physical borders.
So the mining.
Right. While GNI includes GDP, but adds in net primary income from abroad, such as, dividends from international real estate, foreign stock portfolios, and overseas employee compensation.
So in theory, as the GDP, the domestic mining shrank, The GNI should have remained relatively stable because the returns on their global investments would kick in to replace the lost mining revenue.
In theory, yes. And they did attempt to create trust funds and international investment portfolio.
They bought property, right?
Oh, yeah. They bought skyscrapers in foreign cities. They bought airlines, international real estate. But this brings us to the psychological and institutional trap of the resource curse.
Here we go.
When a nation experiences Right, so the data shows a sudden cliff because the domestic engine, the mining, stopped abruptly, and the international investments that were supposed to catch them had been mismanaged, squandered, or tied up in completely failing assets.
Wow. So the safety net they thought they were weaving was actually just full of holes.
Exactly.
And the trade data makes the reality of this cliff incredibly stark. There is a massive structural trade asymmetry that emerges here.
It's totally lopsided.
The exports completely collapse, dropping to that $25.5 million mark we mentioned. But because the island isn't ecologically stripped, 21 square kilometer rock with zero forest cover and largely destroyed arable land due to the mining, they cannot produce their own goods.
They can't grow anything.
No, they remained highly, almost completely dependent on importing basic survival necessities.
They lost their income, but they couldn't reduce their expenses because their expenses were literal survival.
Food, water, medicine.
Exactly. The commercial service and goods imports data shows constant fluctuation over the years, but it remains absolutely vital. They are trapped in a state of perpetual trade vulnerability.
Which is terrifying.
A nation in that position has to import fuel, machinery, medical supplies, and most importantly, food, just to keep the population alive.
And a sudden economic collapse of this magnitude doesn't just empty the national treasury or, cause a dip in the stock market.
No, it hits the streets immediately.
When the wealth vanishes but the need to survive remains, it fundamentally alters human behavior on a mass scale.
It changes everything from social mobility to daily survival strategies, but most profoundly, it alters what people put into their bodies.
Oh, man.
The economic shockwave of the phosphate crash inevitably morphed into a biological shockwave.
Which brings us to the most harrowing section of this analysis, the national health crisis.
This part is tough to look at.
The data here is not just poor. It represents a sprawling, multidimensional public health emergency. The explosion of non-communicable diseases is staggering, particularly when we look at the diabetes data.
The numbers are off the charts.
For adults aged 20 to 79, the diabetes prevalence is sitting at an astronomical 21.8%.
Let that number sink in for you listening. More than 1 in 5 adults.
It's hard to even comprehend a society functioning with that level of chronic illness.
That places Nauru among the countries with the absolute highest prevalence rates of diabetes in the entire world.
And you can see the direct consequence of that chronic disease burden in the mortality statistics. Life expectancy has completely stagnated.
Flatlined.
Female life expectancy is hovering around 63.6 years, while male life expectancy has hit a terrifying trough of roughly 57 years.
57.
In the modern world, for a country that recently experienced one of the highest per capita GDPs globally, a male life expectancy of 57 is indicative of a total systemic failure.
The causality here is deep, and it connects directly back to the economic boom and bust cycle.
How so?
Well, during the resource dividend era, when the phosphate money was flowing freely, the entire lifestyle of the island shifted practically overnight.
Because they had money to burn.
Right. Prior to the boom, the traditional diet relied heavily on local fishing, root vegetables, and foraging. It was a physically demanding lifestyle with a lean, locally sourced diet.
But when you have $43,000 per capita and your island is slowly being turned into an uninhabitable limestone quarry, you stop farming. You stop fishing.
You do. The immense wealth built a profound reliance on imported, highly processed, high-calorie, long shelf-life foods.
Spam, soda, packaged snacks.
Exactly. Canned meats, refined sugars, processed carbohydrates. These didn't just become staples, they became markers of wealth and modern convenience.
It was a status symbol to eat imported food.
It was a rapid national nutritional shift. And you have to understand the physiological impact of taking a population that has adapted over millennia to a specific lean coastal diet and suddenly flooding their metabolic systems with infinite calories of processed Western food.
It overwhelms the biological infrastructure just as fast as it overwhelms the economic infrastructure.
Perfectly said.
The data reflects a brutal dual burden. You have widespread malnutrition because processed food lacks essential micronutrients combined with severe overweight and obesity issues.
And here is the truly tragic irony of the resource curse in this context. The immense wealth allowed the population to purchase a lifestyle that fundamentally poisoned them.
Wow.
But the chronic illnesses caused by that lifestyle, like type 2 diabetes, do not disappear when the wealth dries up.
Right, you're stuck with the disease even if the money is gone.
Diabetes requires lifelong management. It requires insulin, dialysis machines, specialized wound care to prevent amputations, and continuous monitoring.
So the money completely vanished, but the population was left holding the biological bill.
Yes.
They have first-world chronic diseases, but are now relying on an economy that has crashed to third-world levels to treat them.
Which perfectly explains the fragility of the medical system across the board. The burden of treating massive amounts of adult chronic disease drains resources from everything else, including the very beginning of life.
The maternal and child health costs in the data highlight this beautifully. The infant mortality rates show massive statistical volatility.
The swings are huge.
Yeah, the data features uncertainty bounds that range wildly. For instance, in some estimates, we see bounds stretching from 20.3 up to 32.5 deaths per 1,000 live births.
That's a huge variance.
Additionally, the maternal risk remains stubbornly high, despite the fact that basic healthcare is technically available on the island.
We have to interpret that volatility carefully, though. In a population of only 11,947 people, minor absolute changes, just a few extra infant deaths in a given year, create massive statistical swings in the data.
So a small sample size makes the graph look crazy.
Right. But the consistently high upper bounds and the sustained maternal risk point to a profound structural fragility.
The system is cracking under the weight of competing priorities.
Exactly. The healthcare system might have the capacity to dispense basic antibiotics or perform routine checkups, but it lacked the depth, the specialized infrastructure, and the resilience to handle complex critical care consistently.
Because they're too busy managing the diabetes epidemic.
Yes. When you doctors and your budget are constantly fighting an overwhelming daily tide of adult diabetes complications, the specialized resources required to secure high-risk maternal and neonatal health are stretched dangerously thin.
That makes total sense.
You cannot run a robust neonatal intensive care unit if your health budget is entirely consumed by managing preventable adult metabolic disease.
So, if you're listening, follow the logic of this data down the line with us.
Yeah.
You have a society where an enormous percentage of the adult population is sick, and male life expectancy is just 57 years.
Which is tragically young.
If the older generation is vanishing prematurely, it inevitably skews the entire demographic makeup of the country. You are suddenly left with a dangerous imbalance for the next generation.
The demographic pyramid gets completely distorted.
And this brings us to the data regarding the demographic time bomb and idle human capital.
Demographics are destiny, as they say, and Nauru's demographics are sharply defined by this health crisis. Because adults are dying young, the population pyramid is incredibly bottom-heavy.
Very wide at the base.
The data shows that children and young adolescents, those aged 0 to 14, make up a roughly 37% to 38% of the total population.
Nearly 40% of the entire country is under the age of 15. That is a massive demographic bulge.
But nestled within this alarming demographic data is a massive, surprising bright spot.
A rare piece of good news in this report.
Yes. Despite the economic crash, despite the health crisis, education remains highly accessible and effective. The adult literacy rate is an impressive 96.5%.
That's fantastic.
Breaking that down, it's 94.4% for women and 98.3% for men. Furthermore, primary school completion rates routinely hit or even exceed 100%.
Now, from a purely theoretical macroeconomic perspective, a highly literate, educated youth bulge is considered a massive asset.
It's the dream scenario for development.
Right. It is the core ingredient for what economists call a demographic dividend.
A demographic dividend occurs when a large proportion of a country's population enters the working age bracket simultaneously. And if they are educated and employed, it triggers a massive surge in economic growth.
Like an economic superpower booster.
Exactly. South Korea and Singapore utilize this exact mechanism to transform their economies. High literacy should theoretically equal a booming, dynamic workforce capable of pivoting the economy away from raw extraction into services, technology, or high-value manufacturing.
But of course, the data reveals a severe friction between these impressive educational achievements and the reality of the post-phosphate economy.
The reality is much darker.
We have to look at the youth employment crisis, specifically the NEET rate.
NEET is a critical global indicator. It stands for youth, not in employment, education, or training.
Right.
It essentially measures the percentage of young people who are entirely disconnected from the productive systems of society. They aren't working, they aren't studying, they aren't learning a trade. They are idle human capital.
And the numbers for Nauru are deeply alarming. The overall NEET rate is 40.9%.
More than 4 in 10 youths.
And when you break it down by gender, it becomes even more concerning. For young men, it's 33.3%. But for young women, it is a staggering 48%.
Nearly half.
Nearly half of the young women in the entire country are completely disconnected from the formal economy and the educational system.
This introduces a crucial economic concept known as the dependency ratio.
Let's unpack that.
The dependency ratio measures the pressure exerted on the productive working age part of the population. Think about the squeeze happening in Nauru.
Right, the pressure from both sides.
On one end, you have this massive youth population, nearly 40% of the country, that needs feeding, clothing, education, and constant care.
Yeah.
On the other end, you have adults developing severe chronic diseases in their 40s and dying by 57, meaning the older population exits the workforce early and requires intense, expensive medical care.
The few working-age individuals who actually have jobs are crushed in a vice. They are carrying a monumental societal care burden, supporting both the idle youth and the sick elders.
And that is why the high education rate, that 96.5% literacy, is failing to translate into a demographic dividend.
There's nowhere to plug that education into.
There is simply no diversified domestic economy left to absorb this literate workforce. The island has been mined to the point of ecological devastation. There is no agriculture to speak of.
The export market has collapsed.
So you have a highly educated youth population, but they are stepping out of school into a complete void. They are educated, but there is absolutely nothing for them to do.
I have to pause here because this combination of factors seems like a historical recipe for catastrophic failure.
Oh, it usually is.
If you have half your young women and a third of your young men highly literate, totally disconnected from the economy, and physically trapped on a 21 square kilometer rock with zero jobs to go to, I mean, how does society even function?
It's a miracle it hasn't completely collapsed.
How is the entire system not fractured into massive civil unrest? If the domestic economy can't employ them and the health system is bleeding cash, how is the country even keeping the lights on?
That is the pivotal existential question for Nauru. And the answer is found in the final section of our data analysis.
The life support system.
Exactly. Because the domestic economy cannot generate the wealth or the jobs required to sustain the population, the state has been forced to fundamentally alter its role.
It had to mutate just to survive.
The high NEET rate, the staggering health costs, the absolute reliance on imported food and fuel, it all aggregates into a massive, unpayable fiscal deficit.
A huge black hole of debt.
To prevent the society from collapsing under the weight of this dependency ratio and civil unrest, the country has essentially been placed on international life support.
Which brings us to the data on infrastructure, aid, and governance. And paradoxically, when we look at the basic infrastructure data, it actually shows remarkable resilience on the surface.
It does. Despite the macroeconomic freefall and the sprawling health crises, the foundational gears of daily survival are still turning.
The data shows that 100% of the population has access to basic drinking water services.
Which is incredible, honestly.
And 71.3% have access to basic sanitation.
Those specific metrics are the thin line between a chronic health crisis and an acute biological disaster.
Definitely. If water and sanitation fail in a population density of 597 people per square kilometer, living without any natural forest buffer to filter waste, you don't just have long-term problems like diabetes.
No, you get immediate mass casualties.
You trigger immediate mass communicable disease outbreaks. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid. The fact that the water grid and sanitation systems are holding up is literally preventing a catastrophic collapse.
But maintaining a modern water grid, a desalination plant, and sanitation systems on an isolated, mined-out island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is incredibly expensive.
It costs a fortune.
And we already established that the phosphate exports crashed and the domestic economy is stagnant. So, where is the capital coming from to keep the water flowing?
The government revenue data paints a crystal clear and deeply concerning picture. It is incredibly skewed.
Extremely skewed.
Over 71% of the total government income now comes entirely from external grants and aid. The government is essentially running on international donations.
We need to be specific about the nature of this money, though. The data tracks Net Official Development Assistance, or ODA.
Let's break down exactly what ODA means for the listener, because it isn't just like a casual charitable donation from a billionaire.
Right. ODA is a highly specific metric. It is defined as grants or loans provided to developing countries by the official sector, meaning foreign governments and their international agencies.
So other countries footing the bill.
And the primary stated objective of ODA must be the promotion of economic development and welfare. Crucially, if this money is provided in the form of loans rather than outright grants, those loans must be concessional.
Concessional meaning what exactly?
That means they are offered at significantly below market interest rates, containing a grant element of at least 25%. This isn't commercial banking. It's heavily subsidized international life support.
And the volume of this life support pouring into Nauru is massive. The data reveals that net ODA has skyrocketed, reaching over $37.5 million annually.
If we use a physiological metaphor, Nauru has completely lost its internal blood-making capability.
The GDP engine.
Right. The ability to generate domestic wealth is broken. Therefore, the country now relies almost entirely on continuous external international transfusions of capital just to maintain its societal body, keep the water running, and import the food.
But pouring high-octane fuel into an engine only works if the engine's mechanics are sound.
Exactly.
Just pumping $37.5 million of aid into a system doesn't automatically mean the system gets healthier or builds new industries. The data points to severe institutional bottlenecks in how this aid is processed, managed, and utilized.
And this brings us to the WGI dataset.
The Worldwide Governance Indicators. This is perhaps the most vital piece of the puzzle regarding Nauru's future.
The WGI isn't measuring hard cash, export tonnage, or hospital beds. It is measuring the invisible infrastructure of a country, its institutional capacity.
To put it simply, the WGI basically measures how well a government actually works.
Yes.
It surveys citizens, enterprise leaders, and global experts to evaluate the real-world functionality of the state. It measures dimensions like voice and accountability, political stability, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption, and government effectiveness.
And across these dimensions, Nauru struggles profoundly. For instance, the data places their control of corruption hovering right around the 50th percentile globally.
Just middle of the pack at best.
Their rule of law, which measures confidence in and adherence to the rules of society, including contract enforcement and property rights, is stuck at roughly 53.3%.
But the truly glaring critical issue is the government effectiveness metric. The dataset shows this indicator has dropped as low as the 19th to 36th percentiles in recent years.
That's the real bottleneck.
What exactly does it mean to be in the 19th percentile for government effectiveness?
Yeah.
Like practically speaking.
It indicates a systemic, profound inability to execute complex, long-term state functions. Government effectiveness measures the quality of public services, the capacity and independence of the civil service from political interference, the quality of policy formulation, and most importantly, the credibility of the government's commitment to actually implementing those policies.
Wow. Yeah.
When you fall into the 19th percentile, it means that even when you have the right ideas, the state machinery is too fragmented, undertrained, or compromised to execute them.
It's like trying to power a modern smartphone using a rusted, corroded lawnmower engine.
I love that analogy.
The external aid, that $37.5 million, is the high-octane electricity pouring in. The goal is to use that energy to boot up a new, diversified economy. But the institutional machinery, the governance, is too corroded and inefficient to convert that incoming energy into forward momentum.
The power just dissipates.
It just bleeds out.
That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize it. Low government effectiveness acts as a hard structural bottleneck against implementing any kind of serious economic reform.
They're stuck.
The state has essentially transformed. It is no longer an administrator of dynamic domestic wealth creation. It has become a passive administrator of foreign aid distribution.
You just catch the money and hand it out.
And because the institutional capacity is so constricted, they lack the administrative muscle to pivot out of this holding pattern.
It is a truly sobering realization when you lay it all out like that. We have traced the entire flow of this deep dive directly through the undeniable, stark reality of the raw data.
It reveals a relentless, unbroken chain of causality. Every crisis triggers the next.
Exactly. It begins with the absolute physical depletion of a single finite resource, the phosphate rock.
Right.
The island was mined until the environment was destroyed and the resource ran out. That physical depletion triggered an immediate catastrophic macroeconomic crash, causing per capita GDP to plummet and the export market to evaporate.
Which, in turn, locked in the consequences of a rapid forced nutritional shift. The wealth had purchased a reliance on imported processed foods, and the resulting biological shockwave created a sprawling national health crisis dominated by astronomical diabetes rates and plummeting life expectancy.
And that profound health crisis severely skewed the national demographics.
It did.
It left a dependent, massive youth population that is highly literate, yet facing a nearly 41% NEET rate because the domestic economy has been hollowed out and there's no industry left to employ them.
Ultimately resulting in a state structure that is entirely reliant on foreign official development assistance just to keep the basic water and sanitation grids functioning.
All while struggling with a deeply constrained governance capacity that prevents them from implementing the reforms necessary to escape the cycle.
It brings us to the synthesis of this entire exploration. Where does a nation like Nauru go from here?
The definitive conclusion of this data is that Nauru represents the ultimate extreme case study of the resource curse.
Also known as the paradox of plenty. The resource curse occurs when a country with an immense abundance of non-renewable natural resources experiences less economic growth, less democracy, and significantly worse development outcomes than countries with fewer natural resources.
Because the easy money ruins everything else.
Exactly. The wealth distorts the labor market, artificially inflates the currency, breeds corruption, and suffocates the development of any alternative industries. Nauru lived this paradox in its purest, most distilled form.
But the data doesn't just leave us staring into an abyss, does it? There is a breakthrough point embedded in the numbers.
Yes, there is. The path forward for Nauru explicitly relies on leveraging their one remaining highly viable resource.
People.
They can't dig anything else out of the ground is gone. They have to look to the minds of their youth. They must take that 96.5% literacy rate and use it to forcefully diversify the economy beyond physical extraction.
They have to transition to a knowledge or service-based economy.
But to effectively harness that human capital, they have to fix the biological engine first.
The health crisis.
Precisely. The research emphasizes that alongside economic diversification, there must be aggressive, uncompromising state-level interventions against non-communicable diseases.
You can't have a tech boom if half your workforce is on dialysis.
You simply cannot build a new, dynamic, knowledge-based economy if your workforce is suffering from a 21.8% diabetes rate, requiring constant medical care and dying in their 50s. Restoring the physical health and longevity of the workforce is not just a medical imperative, it is a foundational economic requirement.
And this brings us to why all of this matters so deeply to you listening right now.
It's not just an island story.
Exactly. Nauru might be a remote 21 square kilometer island in the Pacific, but the macroeconomic and sociological mechanisms at play there are universal. Nauru is a microcosm for any system that relies entirely on a single pillar of support.
The dynamics scale perfectly to almost any structure.
Think about your own environment. It could be a multinational business that relies entirely on the profits of one star product while ignoring R&D.
Very common.
It could be a local factory town where the entire community's survival is tethered to a single manufacturing plant.
Or even a personal situation.
Yeah, it could be your own personal investment portfolio or career skill set.
Mm-hmm.
If you rely on a single finite asset, without continuously planning and investing for the day that asset runs dry or becomes obsolete, the resulting crash doesn't just lower your bottom line, it fractures the entire architecture of your system.
The harsh lesson of Nauru is about the timing of adaptation. The transition away from a finite resource must happen while you still possess the wealth and stability to fund the pivot.
You have to fix the roof while the sun is shining.
Exactly. If you wait until the wealth is gone to start building the next engine, you are left attempting to manage sprawling, multidimensional crises with absolutely zero margin for error.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over as we look toward the future of this micronation.
If Nauru's highly literate, educated youth are essentially locked on an ecologically stripped island with no local physical jobs, Could the ultimate export of this nation eventually shift from physical phosphate rock to remote digital human capital?
Oh, wow.
Could the internet become the new ocean they navigate to finally break the resource curse?
It is a deeply compelling question.
Yeah.
A digital economy doesn't require 0% forest cover. It doesn't require physical strip mining, deep water ports, or a massive geographic footprint.
Not at all.
It simply requires an educated mind, a stable connection, and the institutional governance to support it.
Here's hoping they can make that pivot.
Truly. Well, we want to thank you for pulling up a chair and joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the data around you, keep challenging the assumptions in your own systems, and we'll see you at the table next time.